On April 23, 1992, two young girls vanished without a trace after an innocent decision to hitchhike home from a night out. What started as an ordinary evening quickly turned into one of Spain's most mysterious disappearances. 𝐂𝐫𝐞𝐬𝐲 𝐋𝐢𝐬𝐄 and Manuela Torres Bujefa were never seen again. Over the next 3 decades, the search for answers would reveal disturbing truths, empty leads, and a white car that would haunt the investigation. Who was driving that car? Why hasn't anyone come forward? And could the truth finally be uncovered after 30 years? This is a case that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. In the small town of Aguilar de Campoo, 2 girls, Virginia and Manuela, lived seemingly normal lives. But on one fateful night, their journey turned into a nightmare that would span decades. No one could have anticipated the tragedy that awaited them, or the unanswered questions that still linger today. Their story begins with laughter, trust, and a shared bond that would soon be shattered. What followed was a disappearance so baffling, so perplexing, that it would take more than 30 years before even the faintest clue would surface. Join me as we unravel the mystery of Virginia and Manuela and explore why some cases are never truly solved.
La gente que pudo o vio algo no ha colaborado en nada porque por miedo a represalias de algún tipo no ha colaborado y sería importante que colaborasen, que ayudasen.
Preguntamos en el tercer y último restaurante.
Hola.
Virginia de Herrero tenía 14 años, su amiga Manuela Torres 13. Ambas vivían en Aguilar de...
Estamos haciendo un reportaje sobre estas 2 niñas. ¿Usted recuerda?
Sí, como no, eran amigas, salieron de juerga y no regresaron.
El ministro del Interior, José Luis Corcuera, se ha entrevistado esta tarde en Palencia con los familiares de las 2 niñas de Aguilar de Campoo.
¿Sí?
Hola, ¿es usted Karima?
Sí, soy yo misma.
Usted es la madre de Manuela Torres, una de las niñas desaparecidas en 1992.
2 niñas en Reynosa en 1992.
In the small town of Aguilar de Campoo, 2 teenage girls lived lives as ordinary as any other. Virginia Guerrero Espejo was just 14 years old, and her mother Trinidad Espejo Muoz described her as affectionate, responsible, and kind. Virginia wasn't known for rebellion, and her life was filled with family, friends, and school. A normal childhood. Manuela Torres Bujefa, on the other hand, had a more complicated background. At only 13, Manuela had already faced more than most could imagine. Born in Aix-en-Provence, France, to a Parisian mother of Algerian descent and a father from Malaga, Spain, her family had already experienced significant disruption before she moved to Spain with her mother after her parents' separation. Despite the challenges she faced, Manuela found solace in her friendship with Virginia. The 2 girls quickly became inseparable, navigating the rough waters of adolescence together. They shared secrets, dreams, and the sense of being stronger together than apart. On April 23, 1992, neither girl woke up with any inkling that this would be the day their lives would change forever. There were no warnings, no foreboding dreams. It was just another normal day, filled with school and the laughter of youth. Virginia's last act that afternoon was an innocent one, asking her mother for money to buy a cake for a birthday party. She spoke with her usual cheerfulness, and Trinidad, trusting her daughter's intentions, gave her the money. It was a simple, everyday request. Virginia left, and her plans seemed harmless enough. But in reality, Virginia had no intention of attending the party. Instead, she met up with Manuela, and together the 2 girls boarded a train bound for Reynosa, a town 32 kilometers away from Aguilar de Campoo. They did not tell their families of their plans, nor did they know that this would be the start of a journey that would end in tragedy. Reynosa offered more excitement than their small town, nightlife, music, and an escape from the usual routine. The girls spent the evening in a nightclub, blending in with the crowd, dancing and enjoying their time. There was no sign of trouble, no altercations, no strange occurrences. But as the night wore on, reality set in. The club closed, and they found themselves stranded. No trains were running back to Aguilar de Campoo. Calling their families was out of the question. It would expose the lie they had told. They were now faced with the consequences of their decision. After some thought, the girls made a dangerous choice that many young people made in those days: hitchhiking back home. Hitchhiking wasn't unusual in rural Spain in the early 1990s. The girls likely felt that someone from their small town would recognize them. Standing on the main street of Reynosa, they waited for a ride. It was then that a white car pulled up. According to a woman from Aguilar de Campo, she later saw Virginia and Manuela get into the car. That was the last confirmed sighting of the two girls. The woman who saw them enter the vehicle could not recall the license plate number. She couldn't identify the driver. At the time, it seemed like a normal moment, one that most people would overlook. But this seemingly ordinary encounter would become the central mystery of a case that would haunt the families for years. By morning, the girls had not returned home. The worry began slowly, with no immediate alarms raised. Perhaps they had stayed with friends. Maybe they missed the last train and were waiting to return the next day. But as the hours passed and there were still no answers, fear began to take hold. The girls' families eventually realized something was wrong. The birthday party story was a lie. The train trip to Reynosa was confirmed. And the search began. It was at this moment that the case took a dark turn. Investigators confirmed the girls had been in Reynosa, and the nightclub was verified. But the most crucial detail came from the witness who saw them get into the white car. Police immediately began searching for the vehicle, but the description was vague. There was no license plate, and the driver was not identified. The car seemed to disappear as quickly as it had appeared. As the investigation continued, more questions emerged. Where did the car go? Who was driving it? Why had the girls vanished so completely? According to a report by RTVE, the case quickly grew colder. No concrete leads, no bodies, and no suspects left investigators with few options. As time passed, the case became overshadowed by another tragedy, the kidnapping and murder of 3 girls in Alcácer, which dominated media attention. The story of Virginia and Manuela faded, buried beneath the weight of another tragedy. But for the families of the 2 missing girls, the search for answers never stopped. They clung to the hope that one day someone would speak, and the truth would finally be revealed. The morning after Virginia and Manuela vanished was not marked by alarms or police sirens. Instead, it began with quiet confusion in the homes of their families. The girls were expected to return the night before, but by morning, there was no sign of them. At first, the families thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the girls had stayed at a friend's house. Perhaps they missed the last train and were waiting until morning to return. But as the hours passed and no one had heard from them, fear began to replace the initial confusion. Virginia's mother, Trinidad, started calling friends, relatives, and neighbors. Everyone assumed the girls would be home by now. The reality that something was wrong started to sink in as the day dragged on. No one had seen the girls return to Aguilar de Campo, and none of their friends had heard from them. The lie about the birthday party quickly unraveled. Investigators confirmed that the girls had indeed traveled to Reynosa, but there was no record of them returning home. The police started retracing their steps. They confirmed they had visited the nightclub, but as the night wore on, they were left with one key detail. A witness had reported seeing the girls enter a white car, but no further details were available. According to Vospuli, the lack of solid leads during the initial hours of the investigation set the tone for what would become a prolonged search, with very few answers. Investigators were left scrambling for details as the clock ticked, and every minute that passed seemed to further erode their chances of solving the case. As the morning dragged on and the girls still hadn't returned, panic set in. The families finally contacted the authorities, and a full investigation was launched. The initial steps included questioning friends and classmates, revisiting the train station, and verifying the girls' movements. But all the police had to go on was the vague description of the white car, and the details of the driver were completely unclear. It was a small town, after all, and many people knew each other. But who had driven the girls away that night, and why? Police investigators began to realize that the case was becoming more complicated with every passing hour. A key witness, a woman from Aguilar de Campo, had described seeing the girls get into the white car on the main street in Reynosa. That would be the last confirmed sighting of Virginia and Manuela. At the time, the authorities believed the girls might have been picked up by someone they knew from their hometown. However, no one was able to confirm whether the car belonged to someone familiar or whether it had been a complete stranger who had stopped for them. As the search expanded beyond the town of Reynosa, the investigation moved toward a national scale. Police expanded their search into surrounding areas, but there was no confirmation of a suspect or a new lead. The disappearance of Virginia and Manuela began to grow in magnitude, with coverage in the press bringing national attention to their case. But even as more resources were poured into the investigation, time became the greatest enemy. Without new evidence, no tangible leads, and no clear motive, the search slowly started to lose momentum. As reported by 20 Minutos, national attention shifted to other tragedies that were making headlines in Spain at the time. The infamous kidnapping and murder of 3 girls in 𝐂𝐾𝐬 diverted the media's focus, overshadowing Virginia and Manuela's case. This shift in focus had a devastating impact on the investigation. As the search continued, there were no significant updates. In time, the media's attention waned, and the case became a forgotten tragedy, overshadowed by the horrific events in 𝐂𝐾𝐬. But for Virginia and Manuela's families, the pain of waiting for answers never stopped. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that the investigation into the disappearance of Virginia Guerrero Espejo and Manuela Torres Bujefa had entered a painful phase. As the search began to stall, the question remained: where were the girls? And who was responsible for their disappearance? As the search for Virginia Guerrero and Manuela Torres continued into its second week, authorities in Spain faced mounting pressure to produce answers. In a typical missing persons case, the first 48 hours are the most crucial. But in this one, those hours passed with little progress. Investigators interviewed friends, retraced the girls' last known movements, and traced the train tickets from Reynosa, but still no breakthrough emerged. By this point, everyone knew the basic timeline. On April 23, 1992, Virginia and Manuela had taken a train to Reynosa to visit a nightclub. The last confirmed sighting of them alive was by a witness who reported seeing them get into a white seat 127 vehicle while hitchhiking back to their hometown. That moment became the anchor point of the entire investigation and one of its greatest mysteries. Despite early efforts, the investigation soon encountered major problems. According to Cadena Ser, former head of the Policía Judicial, Pedro Santos Livares, later stated that there were significant defects in how the initial search was conducted. In the first days, practically nothing was done, he said, criticizing the delay in police response and the lack of coordinated strategy during the most critical window of the search. 4 different witnesses had confirmed seeing a seat 127 matching the description of the vehicle in question. Yet the case eventually focused on a single suspect who was later ruled out. This led to questions about whether every possible lead had truly been followed, or whether the investigation became prematurely constrained by early assumptions. The lack of a solid suspect created an environment where uncertainty thrived. Instead of pursuing multiple lines of inquiry simultaneously, investigators relied on a narrow set of leads that yielded no significant breakthroughs. What should have been a full-court press in those early days became a methodical, but ultimately unfruitful, effort. Families of Virginia and Manuela became increasingly frustrated as the official narrative remained static. With each passing day, the trail grew colder, and the sense that critical early opportunities had been lost became more pronounced. The lack of early action would later become one of the central controversies surrounding the case. The disappearance also sparked debate about whether the case received sufficient media attention. Just months later, another tragic disappearance, the kidnapping and murder of 3 teenage girls in 𝐂𝐾𝐬, Valencia, would dominate headlines across Spain and draw massive national media coverage. This overshadowed many other unresolved cases, including that of Virginia and Manuela, leaving the families feeling increasingly isolated in their search for justice. Public scrutiny focused not only on the lack of tangible evidence, but also on how the investigation was being handled. Critics argued that the early lack of urgency, combined with a failure to follow up on multiple eyewitness accounts, contributed to a scenario where vital leads were lost forever. The consequence of these investigative problems was a long-term stagnation, decades of unanswered questions and pain for the families who still had no closure. Everyone asks, if the case had been pursued with greater speed and coordination early on, would the outcome have been different? Who was in that seat 127, and why has no one ever come forward with definitive information? As the investigation moved forward through the years, it would periodically be reopened. New testimonies would surface, and legal battles would be fought. But none of these efforts would uncover answers that led to a resolution. Instead, they painted a picture of how an investigation can grow complicated not only by the nature of the crime, but by limitations in coordination, strategy, and attention in the most crucial moments. Today, the disappearance of Virginia Guerrero and Manuela Torres remains not only a mystery of what happened that night, but a case study in how early investigative decisions can influence decades of uncertainty. By the time Chapter 4 begins, more than a year has passed since Virginia Guerrero and Manuela Torres vanished from Reynosa in April 1992. Investigators had been working on the case for months, chasing leads, interviewing witnesses, and sifting through every detail they could find. A key part of any missing person investigation is identifying potential suspects. But in this case, that task proved to be more complex and elusive than most could have imagined. According to a report by La Sexta, the disappearance of Virginia and Manuela was revisited decades after the original investigation. A court in Palencia ordered the case to be reopened to re-examine evidence and review testimonies that had been given at the time. Among those who spoke to detectives was a man who admitted he sometimes picked up hitchhikers with his car, though he denied ever picking up Virginia or Manuela on that night in 1992. This interview was significant because it focused on a familiar vehicle, a Seat 127, that several witnesses had associated with the girl's disappearance. Witnesses told investigators that they saw a white or cream Seat 127 in Reynosa on the evening the girls disappeared. Up to 4 people later told the Guardia Civil that they had seen the same model of car with Virginia and Manuela near the main road where the girls had been hitchhiking. However, the man interviewed in the LaSextia.com article insisted that while he had driven that model of car years ago, he had no memory of being in Reynosa that night. Nor did he ever recall seeing the 2 girls. The Guardia Civil conducted extensive interviews and vehicle checks across several nearby provinces including Palencia, Cantabria, Burgos, and Valladolid. This effort was aimed at tracking down any vehicle similar to the description given by eyewitnesses. In the early stages of the investigation, authorities even considered that the driver might have known the girls since Aguilar de Campoo was a small community where people often recognized each other. Despite this exhaustive search, the suspect spoke with investigators and firmly denied any involvement. "I have no recollection of picking them up," he said in the interview that was broadcast by a Spanish investigative program. He claimed that while he sometimes picked up travelers, as many drivers did in rural areas at the time, it wasn't him who gave the girls a ride that night. According to him, the lack of memory was due to the passage of years and the infrequency with which he used the vehicle after that time. The difficulty of interviewing suspects so many years after the disappearance highlights one of the biggest challenges in cold cases. Time itself becomes an adversary. Memories fade, details blur, and physical evidence that might have existed in 1992 can no longer be examined under modern forensic techniques. And yet, investigators continued to look for answers. They questioned individuals with ties to the area and even examined local records from the early 1990s to see if any leads had been overlooked. This phase of the investigation also prompted questions about how the initial case was handled. If important leads were pursued so late, why were they not fully investigated when the disappearance first occurred? Some critics argued that once the spotlight shifted to more sensational crimes later in 1992, such as the notorious Alxer case, other investigations like that of Virginia and Manuela lost media attention and urgency. Regardless of media focus, however, the Guardia Civil explained that they followed all available evidence at the time, and that the decision to archive the case years later was due to the absence of conclusive proof tying a specific individual to the girl's disappearance. Forensic teams continued to review older evidence, but the lack of biological material directly linked to the girls made this increasingly difficult. The families of both Virginia and Manuela expressed ongoing frustration with the slow pace of developments and the repeated cycles of reopening and archiving. After decades with no solid resolution, their hope was sustained only by the possibility that someone, somewhere, might hold information that had never surfaced. The attempts to reopen the investigation and re-interview suspects also raised broader questions about how cold cases are managed within the Spanish judicial system. With improvements in technology and forensic science over the past 30 years, many unresolved crimes have been revisited across Europe, often yielding new breakthroughs. But in the case of Virginia and Manuela, even modern advances offered little tangible progress. The complexity of the case, combined with limited leads and the passage of time, meant that investigators were left with a haunting question. If the vehicle seen that night was recognized, why did none of the witnesses ever come forward with more detailed information about the driver? And if the suspect interviewed truly did not pick up the girls, then who did? This unanswered mystery continued to confound both investigators and the families searching for answers as Chapter 4 draws to a close. Decades after the disappearance of Virginia Guerrero Espejo and Manuela Torres Bujefa, the case returned to the public stage when the Spanish justice system took a significant step: the judicial reopening of the investigation. On August 24, 2021, a judge in Cervera de Pisuerga in the province of Palencia issued an order to reopen the long-dormant case of the two missing girls. Both girls had vanished on April 23, 1992, after leaving a nightclub in Reynosa and attempting to hitchhike back to their hometown of Aguilar de Campoo. For nearly 30 years, their disappearance remained unsolved, turning the case into one of Spain's most haunting mysteries. According to a 2021 La Razón, the decision to reopen the case was based on new lines of inquiry connected to investigative work carried out by experts collaborating with a television program dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Legal representatives for the families, including criminologist Carmen Balfan and her team, had urged the court to reconsider the evidence, citing unexplored angles and potential oversights in how the original investigation had been handled. This reopening was not just a procedural formality. It represented renewed hope for the families that had spent decades without answers. For years, much of the original inquiry had revolved around eyewitness accounts of the girls entering a Seat 127 vehicle on the night of their disappearance. Witness descriptions varied, some citing a white or cream-colored car seen on the main street of Reynosa shortly before midnight. However, despite multiple testimonies, there was never a definitive lead on the driver's identity or the vehicle's registration. As the years passed, the trail grew cold, with many investigators believing that crucial early opportunities were missed. When the court agreed to reopen the case in 2021, it sent shockwaves throughout the community and across Spain's law enforcement circles. Many saw it as an acknowledgement that the original probe had shortcomings, and that lingering questions still merited serious attention. The La Razón article explained that the judge's decision was influenced by compelling arguments from legal teams that believed certain testimonies and physical evidence had never been fully exhaustively examined. As part of this renewed judicial effort, authorities began revisiting witness statements, reanalyzing archived investigation files, and, in some cases, interviewing people who had historically been reluctant to come forward. One of the persistent challenges was the reliability of memories many years after the event. Recollections can become less precise, descriptions can change, and key details can fade with the passage of time. Despite this, investigators believed that even small details might offer a breakthrough. The reopening also prompted scrutiny of how Spanish media had covered the case. The disappearance of Virginia and Manuela had occurred in the same year as the tragic 𝐂𝐸𝐬 case, where 3 teenage girls were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. The media frenzy surrounding that case, which unfolded later in 1992, drew intense national attention and overshadowed many other unresolved disappearances. This notoriety meant that the public memory of Virginia and Manuela's disappearance was often muted compared to the widespread coverage of the 𝐂𝐸𝐬 tragedy. Despite the renewed legal activity, no new definitive suspect was identified as a result of the reopening. But for the girls' families, the fact that the case was taken back to a judicial stage was significant in itself. It offered a moment of acknowledgement that the search for justice was still alive and that authorities were still being urged to examine every possible clue. Legal experts involved in the motion pointed to the importance of transparency and thoroughness in cold case investigations, especially when initial efforts may have lacked resources or urgency at the time. One of the legal representatives stated that revisiting the case could be valuable not only to find answers, but also to restore confidence in the criminal justice process for families who have been waiting decades without closure. It became clear to many that the pain of uncertainty, the not knowing, can be as torturous as the act of losing a loved one itself. Reopening the case served as an official acknowledgement of both that pain and the possibility that unanswered evidence might still exist. By the end of this chapter, the reopened investigation stood as a testament to the perseverance of the families and their legal teams. While no conclusive resolution emerged even after the renewed effort, the judicial decision to re-examine the disappearance kept the hope alive. Not just that answers might be found someday, but that the case had not been forgotten. As the years continued without a definitive breakthrough, the disappearance of Virginia Guerrero and Manuela Torres remained a chilling reminder of how many questions can persist long after the moments that changed everything. This case has been a long and painful journey for the families of Virginia Guerrero and Manuela Torres. Over 3 decades have passed, but the mystery remains. The questions still echo. Who was driving that white car? Why have no new leads come forward? Why has no one spoken the truth? Despite the pain, the families have never stopped searching for answers. Their strength and perseverance continue to fight the silence. The reopening of the investigation in 2021 brought hope, but it also highlighted how many years of lost opportunities have passed. This case is not just about 2 missing girls, it's a reminder of how justice can be delayed and how silence can bury the truth. The family's fight for answers continues, and their story is far from over. This case has undergone extensive research and investigation, and it has taken time to cover every angle. If you are interested in reading the complete investigation, I will add resource links in the description below. You can follow the investigation from there. Don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Truth to stay updated with more in-depth investigations and mysteries like this. Click the bell icon so you never miss a story. Share your thoughts, theories, and comments below, because some stories only survive when they are remembered.